You are listening to the CMR audio project. The CMR is the Institute for Coastal and Marine Research at the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. I'm David, or Dave if you prefer, a philosopher swimming in the cross and transdisciplinary waters of the CMR. If you would like to know more about the CMR or what cross and transdisciplinarity are all about, do listen to the first episode of the audio project with Dr. Bernadette Snow. She talks about those things and more. This episode is with Professor Janine Adams. Janine is an expert in shallow water systems. She tells us a bit about herself and then she jumps straight into the algal bloom. Sounds yummy. Depending on when you're listening to this, there either is or was an algal bloom in the Swartkorps River on the outskirts of Port Elizabeth, and Janine tells us about that. Please note that all opinions or views expressed during the CMR audio project episodes are those of the participants alone and do not necessarily reflect any official position of the university or a department therein. If you would like to contact me, please do so by emailing me a question or a comment at cmraudioproject@gmail.com and I'll get back to you. All episodes of the CMR audio project are available for download at archive.org. Head over to archive.org and search for CMR audio project and you should find the right page. Detailed download instructions are also available at the CMR website. Search for Nelson Mandela University, CMR, and you should find what you're looking for. Okay, Professor Adams, Janine, welcome and thank you for taking the time to talk to me and for the valuable information that you will no doubt provide for listeners. The main focus for this interview is going to be the algal bloom that either is occurring or did occur in the Swartkorps River. I'm not sure if it's still there, but before we get there, could you tell me a little about yourself, perhaps adding something that few or none of your work colleagues may know about you?
Hello, David. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having this chat. Yeah, I think I wear many different hats. So I am a professor in the Department of Botany at Nelson Mandela University. I'm also Deputy Director, Bernie's Director of the Institute for Coastal and Marine Research. And I hold a position as a research chair in shallow water ecosystems. And that is funded by the DSI and the NRF. So even on campus, I can be called a marine biologist, a botanist, an ocean scientist. And then another thing is that I actually have two surnames. I was just filling in a claim form today, and my married name is Hiscock, and the university insists on having me as my married name on all my forms. So very often I'm two different people, which also has its perks sometimes.
Is that Janine Hiscock Adams?
No, I never did a double barrel name. So I'm Janine Hiscock, Mrs. when I want to be, and Professor Janine Adams when I want to be.
That's nice. Very convenient. Dare I ask when you use one over the other?
My children are fully grown now, but sometimes it was then I had the title doctor. It was quite nice not to walk around with that title because some people would just assume things. And being a biological doctor, you couldn't answer all the medical questions.
You could take the offer and pretend you know the answers to their questions. Thanks, Janine. Let's jump into the algal bloom now. Sorry, I couldn't resist. What is the algal bloom? What are its likely origins? What are the potential impacts? Okay, a lot of questions here. And some that might not be so familiar. What should we do about it? Should we do anything about it at all? Or is it just something we observe, we watch? Or is it something we should be more concerned about and then act in a certain way to prevent or to create awareness about what's happening with the algal bloom?
It indicates that the ecosystem has changed. It indicates a tipping point. The algal bloom in Swartkorps Estuary now, it did receive quite a bit of media coverage because algae, they're unicellular plants that grow in the water column, and this particular species, it turned the water black. And it also, once it decays, there's no oxygen in the water, so the fish started dying and some mud prawns and bloodworms started moving away from the anoxic area, and so people started to notice. But we've been doing work on water quality changes, and even in the Swartkorps for a very long time, and this indicates a tipping point. The system has just received too much pollution, too much nutrients from the upstream catchment, and in Swartkorps that comes from 3 wastewater treatment works, so it's a heavily developed catchment, and so what we see downstream in the estuary with this algal bloom is because of what's happening upstream. And those wastewater treatment works, they become overloaded. Sometimes there's raw sewage going into the estuary, and that creates the type of algal bloom problems that we saw in Swartkops. We have a similar bloom in Sundays. Sundays, the nutrients are a different source. It's from agriculture. It's from the citrus in the catchment. So you say, what can we do about it? We can raise awareness. And when we see changes in the environment, we can tell our local authorities, we can get involved with people such as Swartkops Conservancy. We can do something about rehabilitation of the catchment. But water quality is a big issue in South Africa at the moment. And a lot of it's coming from overloaded wastewater treatment works that just need to be upgraded. So sometimes it's an infrastructure problem.
Is that the case with the Motherwell Canal?
So Motherwell Canal, so what we're seeing with the algal bloom, that's because of pollutant input from Uitenhage, Dispatch, Quanabuchle wastewater treatment works, the Kelvin Jones treatment works, whereas Motherwell comes from an urbanized area, and that is stormwater runoff. You get catchment runoff, stormwater runoff coming down from Motherwell Canal. That comes into the middle of the estuary and also causes some changes there. But in estuaries, we're quite lucky because they've got the fresh water coming in at the top, seawater coming in at the bottom, and the sea can often mix and get rid of the pollutants. So at Motherwell, we still have some mixing of contaminants, but we're doing research there all the time. And we have a new project that's looking at restoration of Swartkops and particularly looking at innovative methods for water quality control. So that's why we were able, when the media came to us now, we're able to provide them with information. Today, we provided more information to Swartkops Conservancy. A local politician was asking us for information. So because we've been doing research on this issue, we're now able to inform different sectors.
Have you heard much feedback from readers that read that article in the Herald? Did they have their awareness improved about those issues? Do you think there's something positive that's going to come out of this algal bloom?
Definitely, because, people have different perceptions of what the reason is and what the driver is. So I think people are just more aware. Yeah, put pressure to make sure that things are managed properly. So awareness is always good. And also people are concerned. People living around the Swartkops, there were dead fish, and there was actually increased bird life because it was eating the dead fish. So, yeah.
Interesting. Just to clarify my question earlier, when I mentioned the Motherwell Canal, it was in response to your point about infrastructure needing to be upgraded. It seemed that was an obvious area to mention because, if I remember correctly, during the tour that you gave one of our pilgrimage groups, it looked like there was the option to send some of that canal water, I was about to say right, I imagine north, towards the Grindal Mountains, and that could then have flowed into the old salt pans. So that's the kind of infrastructure project that came to my mind when you mentioned that. You mentioned the Swartkops restoration project. So maybe you could talk a little about that restoration project, but then also the concern for me would be that's an obvious area to tackle. What about further upstream where you can't really get your hands on? Those are industry areas that I don't see how academics and researchers can really transform.
Okay, so let me first speak about Motherwell. Yeah, although we've harmed the environment and we've disturbed ecosystem health, there's always opportunities for restoration. So Motherwell, the water comes in from, as I said, storm water, sometimes just blocked drains and that. And it's got an artificial wetland at the bottom of the canal. So the water goes into the wetlands before it goes into the estuary. And that plays a very important role at cleaning that water before it goes into the estuary. So part of restoration is looking at putting more artificial wetlands into the system. But as you identified there, one should limit any inputs. So anything that's flowing into an estuary that wasn't there naturally, we should be recycling that water or using it elsewhere. I think, as you said, on the water pilgrimage last year, one of the other management options was for the Motherwell Canal water to go to the Kuche treatment works. That was an option. You say industry. Now, we've got very good legislation in South Africa. Our National Water Act, very good. And anybody who's actually discharging pollutants into the environment, they get a license from Water Affairs that tells them what their discharge standard has to be. So industry should be compliant with that. They should have a license for discharge. But of course, they're as compliant as they deem fit to be, or they need to be more regularly checked by Water Affairs. So we do have mechanisms of controlling industrial input, but we probably don't have enough policing of that going on.
So, Janine, what you've described sounds like quite a complex situation. There's inputs all along the Swartkorps River, all the way up, and then it starts clearing up towards the Grindal area. That water is pristine. And as a hiker, I'm often taken by the contrast between the clarity and almost the baptismal quality of the water there. In contrast, down at the river mouth, I would be concerned to swim in the water. There's something of a tragedy there for me. Does the average person have any options here for getting involved? Awareness seems like a great idea, but what does that actually enable as far as action?
Okay, so you say definitely the water quality in the upper reach is pristine, and then Swartkorps is a very good example of that. As you go downstream, you have agricultural inputs, you have industrial inputs, you have wastewater treatment inputs and point source inputs such as Motherwell Canal. In terms of action, what we can do, we've started in the Eastern Cape province, but I think some of the other provinces are leading the way better, maybe Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, where they have these river action groups, and local groups can be put in charge of taking care of a certain section of the river. And when there's a spill or when there's some sort of visible contamination, they actually alert the authorities and make sure that there's follow-up. And now in the estuary, the Swartkorps Conservancy have been playing that role for many years, but we need it from catchment down to coast.
Thank you. Yes, just a shout out to Dale and Jenny at the Swartkorps Conservancy. Is it possible to support the Swartkorps Conservancy and in that manner play some kind of positive role in this thing?
Yes, I don't think we need to go and make our own organizations. We have the Swartkorps Conservancy, it's something to be proud of. It's the oldest estuary conservancy in the country. There are many other estuary care groups around the country, but Swartkorps is the oldest one, and they're definitely always looking for participation, new input, and young blood. So they're an example. But we also have other organizations such as WESA, the Wildlife and Environment Society of South Africa. They're doing a lot of useful work in and around the Port Elizabeth area.
So, Janine, we've spoken a little about the algal bloom. We've then moved on to discussing some broader issues about inputs along the river. I read in one of the reports that the algal bloom has been seen before. Is that correct? So in the past, it did its thing, it disappeared, now it's not disappearing. This is obviously related to the inputs along the river. What brought it in the first place? I read about birds or ships. That seemed like quite a wide range of options, almost opposite sides of the spectrum. Could you talk a little bit about those two options? Which one is likely? And this is completely speculative. I'm not asking you to give the final decision on this thing, but maybe you could just talk about this.
This is a harmful algal bloom species, and so it's been described elsewhere around the world. It's heterosigma, and so we can also learn from what other people have published and worked on it. It was first described in Japan, and often these harmful algal bloom species do come from Asian waters, but it's just because they've been studying them for a long time, because they have a lot of aquaculture growing of shellfish and other organisms that are susceptible to harmful algal blooms. So it was described in Japan, probably associated with the aquaculture ventures there. So a harmful algal bloom species, if it's toxic, it can take out an entire cultivation of shellfish. And that's why we have a lot of species described from there. We don't know how they got here. And so there have been some publications on migratory birds that come from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, and it might have been with them. Harmful algal blooms in coasts and harbors. It's been well published and a well-known fact that they came from the ballast water in ships. So to balance the ships, it would take water from one area and then dispose of it in another area. And a lot of these species sit in resting cysts, and as soon as they're exposed to light, they will grow. So unfortunately, we don't know where heterosigma in the Swartkorps comes from, but we do know that globally it's a harmful algal bloom species, and so we can draw on the studies that have been conducted on it around the world to understand its function and responses.
There has been a conspicuous increase of bunkering boats in that area. Does that concern you?
There's new legislation now that says that very much controls where you can dispose of that ballast water. So it's not near coastal areas or harbors where there can be retention time. It's more offshore. So that was a past entry point for not only harmful algal bloom species, but other invasive organisms. But it's controlled now through making sure that ships change ballast water further offshore. It's a piece of new legislation, global legislation on that.
I think some listeners might remember the red tides that we saw in Port Elizabeth in the past. Is there any relation here, maybe not just species-wise, but in the general concerns that you're raising?
That red tide was also harmful algal bloom species, also recorded from other parts of the world. That was Linglodidium. And there was a change in the environmental conditions, offshore winds, but we also have some data to show that that species responded to nutrient input from the land. So all of our land-based activities, whether it's agriculture, wastewater treatment works, it's adding pollutants, it's adding nutrients to the water, and that's causing harmful algal blooms to grow. And this is a global response, and we've published on Algoa Bay to show that there was an increase in nutrients to the coast, and it could have resulted in that Linglodidium, the red tide bloom in Algoa Bay as well. And we saw the normal impacts of blooms. What they do is they grow very dense, they change the color of the water, and then when they die, the water becomes anoxic, no oxygen, so other organisms start dying, such as fish and crabs and things.
So I remember not being able to swim during the red tide. That's about the extent of the impact that it had on me. I don't go to the Swartkops River much, and when I do, I definitely don't swim in it. So I'm wondering what would be the consequence of the newer algal bloom in the Swartkops River on the locals there, maybe people who are fishing from the river, people who are using it for baptism. Baptism comes up again, doesn't it? People literally baptize each other in that river. What are the broader implications for those activities?
Because harmful algal bloom indicates pollutants, it's not a bacteria as such, but if the bloom is there, we know there are also bacteria and viruses in the water, and if we consume those, we can become sick. So it's always very disturbing and concerning to me. Every time we go to Perseverance, we see a baptism or a similar ceremony where people are utilizing the water, and it's of very poor quality. I think water quality is often overlooked because you can't see it unless the fish start dying and things start smelling bad. People don't really have you can't see water quality, so it's an unknown.
So in some ways, the algal bloom is a litmus test, maybe a reminder of what's happening in the river in general. And then every now and again, there's this visual display that something's amiss. We should be concerned more generally and try and prevent the algal bloom from rearing its ugly head. But that doesn't mean that you only do something when you see it. We should be doing something upstream more proactively. And people like Dale and Jenny at the Swartkops Conservancy really stand out in this regard. May I now change slightly over to your chair? You are a Shallow Water Ecosystems Saatchi Chair. Could you talk a little bit about it? What is it all about? What's happening under the chair position that you occupy? And maybe how that links into the Swartkops area and beyond.
Okay, so this chair position was part of NRF and our Department of Science and Technology, now Department of Science and Innovation, to grow research activities in the country. So they funded a number of chairs around the country. And my specific research area is on estuaries. So I've been fortunate to work from the Orange River mouth on the west coast all the way up to Cozy on the east coast. And we work on the conservation and management of estuaries and working very closely with government departments, Department of Water Affairs, Department of Environmental Affairs. So just as we're doing with the Swartkops and the water quality issue there, we try and transfer our knowledge across the science, policy, action, or government's management continuum. And so some of our research areas at the moment, climate change and blue carbon habitats, then the water quality issues that we've discussed, and now we're getting into restoration of estuaries. And that's restoration, it's improving the health of estuaries so that they can deliver all the ecosystem services that we're dependent on. So we want a healthy estuary because that means healthy humans, a healthy environment. So that's briefly some of our activities. I supervise a lot of postgraduate students, so that's my main activity, a lot of master's and doctoral students. Overall, I think my research team is about 30 people, if I include all the research assistants. And then we collaborate with a wide group of people in South Africa as well as internationally.
So if a young person is listening and would like to maybe study in the field of the ocean sciences, shallow water ecosystems, What would they be doing during their research under your chair position?
So they would be working either in restoration or blue carbon habitats and climate change. And they would typically come from a research environment where they have a BSc, but also we're doing a lot of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary studies. So we're working with a wide group of different researchers from different disciplines and backgrounds. But mostly our research is on a postgraduate level. So you would get your basic degree and then enter the research environment. There's a lot of exciting international opportunities at the moment. We're working on the One Ocean Hub project. We have a big international salt marsh project, and there's always new opportunities arising for those that are interested.
So thinking back to your student days, could I ask you what made you interested in this field of research, and why do you think it matters in the grander scheme of things?
I enjoy being outdoors. And yeah, I suppose one of my hats is I'm an ecologist, so we enjoy going into the natural environment and seeing how it works. And yeah, I suppose I've always had a love for nature and wanted to make a difference. And then also combining it with my other passion, which is training and capacity building. So it's a perfect career for me.
So if a young student or someone who's interested in this topic is listening and they are interested in finding out more, could I ask you for any recommendations on books, films, documentaries, or anything you think is worthwhile for people to expose themselves to, and perhaps a little bit about why it would be worthwhile for them?
Yeah, worthwhile. I think, your passion must be to make a difference in this type of work. We connect a lot of different people. And so working with local authorities, with government, with all sorts of stakeholders, different communities, and that, you probably need to be a people's person. How to get into it, what to read. There's so many good online sites. You can go look at it was World Oceans Day yesterday. I saw the UN was publishing a lot of good information. Go look at the WWF sites, our own SANBI, South African National Biodiversity Institute, our government Department of Oceans and Coasts, our Department of Water Affairs. These are all local places where you could get jobs one day, and certainly where some of my students work past you.
I used to love watching things like the Blue Planet documentaries. Is there anything to that anymore? It feels like we've had documentaries and films and books galore, yet we're still seeing an overall degradation of nature, of wildlife in general, of ecosystems, marine ecosystems. Do you think it's still worthwhile watching, exposing, etc., or is there a balance to be had between, let's say, information and then action? And this is really, I suppose, a personal question that's not related to the chair, but I really have that concern. As academics, we do a lot of online research. We do, in your case, field work. It doesn't seem like we're winning the fight against the broader, I don't want to say destruction of the planet, but perhaps that's a good word for it. How do you feel about that personally? Sorry if it's too much to ask of you, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, David, certainly what I see is that since I was at school, okay, that was a long time ago, but actually the youth of today is more environmentally aware than they were in the past. And I think it's because of all the good documentaries and the exposure. But it's not only visual, it's actually taking people out into the environment, taking school groups out. At part of the university training, which our students are missing out now because of the lockdown, is going into our natural campus vegetation, going on field trips to Swartkops Estuary, and sometimes exposing students for the first time to coastal environments, to natural environments. And it's that experience of these special places that actually give people a connection. I don't believe it's only documentaries and books. It's actually giving people exposure as often as possible.
I second that. Get out there, experience nature as much as you can, and then create, whether it's creating something academic or creating something more artistic. Create material, create good art, as someone once said. Janine, could I ask if there's anything else you'd like to add at these final moments of our interview?
You've asked me questions about encouraging the youth to participate in this, and I think we're always available to talk. We get involved in a lot of school and action groups, but through our Institute for Coastal and Marine Research, if people want to make contact and hear more about the type of research we do, we're always available to connect on that level.
Thank you. Can you provide a contact for us there?
You can go and look at the website, or my own email would be janine.adams@mandela.ac.za. The website would be CMR. You could just go and look for CMR. It's our Institute for Coastal and Marine Research, or CMR for short.
Yes, and I've noticed that if you type in Nelson Mandela University, CMR, it comes straight up top of the search results.
And then for my own research, we have a Facebook site, which is called Mandela Estuarine Ecology. And we're always trying to post just awareness, useful videos. We had some pictures of the bloom and the algae in Swartkops now. We had the high sea storm event that happened a few weeks ago, and I think we're getting in a cold front now, so we're heading that way, where the waves whip up the sea level, and that comes into our coastal environment, so it's always interesting and exciting. So you can search for Mandela Estuary Ecology on Facebook, and then we also do tweets and things like that.
Thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
That's a great pleasure, and good luck with your work.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the episode. If you have any questions or comments, please do feel free to send them to me at cmraudioproject@gmail.com. You should receive a reply at some stage from either me or a relevant guest. All episodes of the CMR Audio Project are available for download at www.archive.org. Head over to archive.org and search for CMR Audio Project, and you should find the right page. If you would like to download an episode, you can do so at that website, and detailed download instructions are available at the CMR website, cmr.mandela.ac.za. Many thanks to the extremely talented Kendall Beeden, who composed and recorded the theme music for this audio project. Kendall's email address is kendallbeeden@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, may the tides of life treat you kindly.